When there's change in your life, you tend to remember it. And when there is no change, you tend to mush it all together, right? Even with my business, like the moments and the years I remember is when there was major fluctuations that happened. When things are just going well and everything is smooth, the years tend to sort of combine.
One path is a long, winding, unpaved, back-breaking, bumpy, miserable road to a place called success. The other road is straight, paved, smooth, comfortable, and that road ends up in a place called failure. Welcome to the show. I am Kyle Matthews on the Matthews Mentality Podcast, where we dive into the mindset of the world's most driven founders, CEOs, business moguls, athletes, and entrepreneurs. Each episode will turn our guests' wisdom into practical advice that will help you build a deeper understanding of what led them to success and the mentality behind what got them there. Let's get started. Welcome to another episode of the Matthews Mentality Podcast. Today, I am joined by a true luminary.
Well, that's the first for that.
There we go. Making it happen. First for everything. Luminary in the world of publishing, a visionary leader, entrepreneur, and a trailblazer in the real estate and finance news landscape. Amir Korangy, the founder, chairman, and publisher of the esteemed business magazine, The Real Deal, is with us to share his wealth of knowledge, expertise, and insights. The Real Deal stands as one of the country's largest and most influential real estate and finance news outlets, providing invaluable insights into the dynamic world of New York real estate and beyond. Amir has not only pioneered a platform of news exclusives, wide-ranging interviews, and in-depth analyses for brokers, developers, investors, appraisers, bankers, architects, and real estate enthusiasts, but he has also established himself as an investor, a film producer, and a dedicated professor.
Yeah, Columbia.
Should I call you professor?
I love it.
All right.
I insist all my students call me a professor, but you don't have to.
All right. And Amir's journey reflects a deep belief in his vision and unwavering commitment to excellence. Today, we're going to dive into the mind of a great leader in real estate, exploring the principles that have guided him to success. Please join me in welcoming Amir to the podcast. Amir, thanks for having me in your spot. This is great.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming.
No, this is awesome. Go ahead. Yeah.
I feel like yesterday I was watching Law and Order, and I was thinking Law and Order is a horrible advertising for New York because there's like always these terrible crimes that happen.
This is
and
true.
People love that show.
My dad loves that show.
Everybody loves. It's a great show. People love to shit on New York.
Yes.
So it's and I was thinking, anything I can do to promote positivity and goodness for New York, I love doing it. And one thing about your intro that you did that I'd like to point out is that, when I first started The Real Deal, it was focused on New York, but today we really are a national news organization.
I was going to touch on that later in terms of your founding of The Real Deal. When I first became aware of it, this was over a decade ago, it was more New York, but so many of the heavy hitters in New York are transacting around the country. In the market I was in at the time, Southern California, obviously there's a lot of capital migration between those two markets. And then, over the last, and we'll dive into the exact timing behind it, but over the last 10, 15 years, you guys have done a great job spreading out into the most of, if not all of the major MSAs in the United States.
Yeah, we're in 8 of them now, and we're looking to go into your market, Nashville soon, and Atlanta, hopefully. But just to give you some perspective about why New York was a good place for us to start. And one was that I was here. At 2, 50% of the financing and investments that happen to real estate across the country, 50% of it, or slightly more than 50% of it, goes through Midtown Manhattan. So the fact that so many of the deals that happen across the country are approved and reviewed by people in the city, we felt that if we could cover this market thoroughly, it would allow us to have an influence on all these other markets that we wanted to go into and cover as well.
I agree. I can verify that firsthand as an agent brokering deals in my previous life. So often you're talking to the GP who might be in the market in a Southern California, in a Dallas, in a Atlanta, or a Nashville, and then you get to the 2-yard line and you're like, okay, you're ready to sell. Or they call you and say, hey, we ended up going with someone else. And you're like, wait, I thought you wanted to hire me. It's like, I did, but my LP, my investors did. And you're like, well, where were they? Like, they're in New York City. You're like, damn it, I need to spend more time out there. So personally, as part of my business practice, my last I would say my last almost decade when I was actively trading deals, I would spend about 2 months a year in New York City just because it was so important.
Yeah.
And like Frank Sinatra who said, if you can make it here, you can make it
Anywhere, yeah.
Certainly for a publication. Now, what does a typical day or week look like for you right now?
It's different things. I have about 9 different departments within the company. I try to meet with each department at least once every week. And then beyond that, it's a lot of meetings with people outside of the firm and just thinking about coming up with new products and, creating new products for the real deal. And, it's funny, I always tell my team that if we had launched the real deal in the 1980s, we wouldn't have to change our business model for 30, 40 years, right? And in the last 10 years, I've had to change my business model 3 times. And we're very lucky in that instance in that we're a smaller company, like we're slightly more than 100 people or so. And that allows us to be more nimble. But we were also, willing to make the changes, realizing that like, hey, we have to do more of this. We have to do more of that. But, when I started the magazine, it was just a magazine. It was a glossy magazine, and that's all we had to do. And today it's, we have the social media stuff, the podcast, the video stuff, the programmatic stuff, and, having to become an expert in all this stuff, by force is, it's been good. But like, we were speaking earlier about, as you get older, you have less of a willingness to learn new things and to change and adapt as the market needs. So luckily I was 29 years old when I started The Real Deal, and I was able to shift and adapt easily. But, as I get older, now I just turned 50, and it's with AI coming and a lot of this technology changing and shifting things fast, you have to think about what's going to be the next shift, and how are you going to navigate the incoming sort of things that are coming from AI into your business, and trying to look at those things. And even though AI is not where it's supposed to be right now, it's growing at a very fast pace.
It is, yeah.
And it's not the things that you think are going to impact you. It's like something random usually. Like when the internet came out, people didn't think that the internet was going to change real estate. What does the internet have to do with real estate? But that communication and being able to connect with a much wider audience and being able to send your message to a much wider audience changed the business dramatically. And the people who were able to, adopt that change, they were able to eat up all the market share of the people who didn't adopt the change.
Yeah, I've admittedly, I've taken one of your lines. I think I saw it on one of the emails from one of your teammates at The Real Deal. It said, you're not going to be replaced by AI, but you will effectively be replaced by someone leveraging AI.
Right.
And I say it all the time, and I couldn't believe more strongly in that. That actually, where we first met in person down in Miami at your AI conference, that was very interesting. I mean, there was some talks and some panels up there that was eye-opening.
Well, I used to work at Yahoo when I first came to New York, and that was when Yahoo was the Google of the world. And I remember trying to convince the Ford Motor Company to build a landing page for a new truck that they had built. And they were like, no, we're going to stick, our business is more brick and mortar. People want to feel and taste and smell a car. And we're going to focus on, print ads and things like that. And I thought it was just so crazy that I was trying to convince this billion-dollar company to create a landing page for like the Ford Motor Company is not going anywhere. But surely a lot of companies like Ford and Ford itself, they lost market share because they didn't adopt that technology sooner.
And unfortunately for The Real Deal or Matthews, we do not get government backing if we make bad decisions,
No,
right?
unfortunately
I think
not.
Ford can make those decisions, and they're part of that too big to fail mantra. But it's funny. I just saw something pop up on social media. Speaking of Yahoo, maybe it knew we were going to be meeting. It was, you probably would know it better than I, and if you don't, forgive me for bringing it up. It said something, in Google, Google offered to Yahoo, said, hey, buy us for like, $2 billion, and they said no. And then a couple of years later, they came back and said, we'll buy you for $5 billion, and Google said no. Yeah. And then fast forward, it was like 2014 or 2015, and Somebody offered Yahoo 40 billion and they said no, and then they ended up selling for 640 million. It was
Oh my God, this is
is that roughly correct?
it's something like that. But it's when Google first came out, I was working at Yahoo, and people were like, "Oh, they don't have the bells and whistle that Yahoo has," because Yahoo Finance to this day it's the largest finance site in the world, and but Yahoo was like, "Look, we're gonna specialize on these bells and whistles. We're not gonna focus on search." And at one point, Yahoo was using Google search to power Yahoo's search. And they totally gave up the farm when they did that. As soon as they brought in Google to power Yahoo's search. I mean, imagine if you go to if Matthews goes to Cushman and Wakefield and says, "Hey, Cushman Wakefield, can you power Matthews
That would be
commercial?"
bad. Just to be clear, that will never happen.
That would never happen, right?
Yeah, it may be in reverse, but no, I hear you. I want to go through your story arc, how you get to Yahoo, and then ultimately into before that journalism, but then Yahoo, and then it leads to Real Deal. But let's go all the way back to the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Iran, and then the revolution happened, and like 6 million Iranians, largest modern exodus, we had to leave Iran. And we sort of were refugees for about a year, and then we landed in the Washington.
We, as in your family.
Yeah, me, my mom, and my brother. We were separated from my father when the revolution first happened, and he rejoined us years later. But initially, it was just me, my mother, and my brother.
So, if you don't mind, let me push pause. To the best, and so how old you were? 6, 7-ish?
8.
8? Do you remember?
Yeah.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Like what happens? Is there just
when there's
this
change in your life, you tend to remember it, and when there is no change, you tend to mush it all together. Yeah. Right? Even with my business, like the moments and the years I remember is when there was major fluctuations that happened. When things are just going well and everything is smooth, the years tend to sort of combine.
All right. So you're 8 years old. You're in Tehran.
In Tehran, yeah.
And is it just a feeling that starts permeating the neighborhood, the block, like something is happening, and if you left, then perhaps may I assume it's like something bad might be happening?
Yeah.
Or is it you're outside playing soccer with your friends, and one day your mom comes in and says, "We need to leave today"?
It sort of happened that way, but so the revolution was happening. Nobody knew that you had the monarchy that was in place, and
That was the Shah.
The Shah was there, and then there was all these minor revolutions that happened. People were angry here, and the feminists were angry, and the communists were angry, and the Islamists were angry, and then a revolution happened. Everybody poured into the streets, and nobody knew who was in charge. The Islamists were the only ones who were willing to kill other people to make get their point across. So they were the ones who became the ruling party. And then my father just didn't think they could last. He was like, "This is not sustainable." So we decided to live within that society for less than a year. And I went to school, and immediately in school they separate the boys and girls. And immediately they put like these uniforms on us, and my father was like, "This is insane! Like, how could this?"
And then did they force the girls and the women to change what they were wearing? Because
yeah, they had to wear hijab.
My understanding is before the revolution, Iran, economically, but also how would I say, culturally, was a little more liberal.
No,
right?
super liberal, very modernist.
Yeah.
Everybody was in mini dresses, bikinis, the whole lot.
That just got shut down.
And that got shut down, and women had to wear hijabs. And my father always thought this is not sustainable. And finally, his name came in the paper where they were like, "We want him for interviewing, for interrogation." And usually, those people never saw the light of day again.
What was it they thought they wanted to interrogate him about?
He used to be a judge, and he also had a factory, so he was considered a feudalist. And
they were looking to appropriate all that into the government.
They did that. And but first they were going to interrogate him, but it never came to that. One day he goes to the office, and I don't see him for 3 years after that, because he had to go into hiding.
And did you know? Did your mom say, "Hey, Dad had to go into hiding," or were you just kind of in the dark?
So my dad goes to we have breakfast in the morning, every morning, and then my dad leaves to go to the office. And then as soon as he gets to the office, he calls. He's like, "Pack your bags. Somebody's coming to pick you guys up. They're coming. My name was in the paper today." So my mom goes to pack her bags. But before we could pack our bags, there was like a bunch of military people at our house already. And then that was like the last phone call I had with my dad for, my mom was in touch with him for.
What was that like in the moment when they showed up at their house? Was there, I assume, genuine fear, right?
As a kid, you don't really, you just sort of mind yourself. But I could just, going back and thinking about my mom, I always wonder like what was going through her head, because now not only my father is in there, here's this young woman with these 2 kids, and there's this disorganized military that's there looking for answers. And we managed, they were there for like 3-4 days waiting for my father. And, of course, my father was in hiding at that point. And
he was hiding within the country, and then eventually
at that point within the country, he just disappeared.
And how long? I'm sure you heard the story later. How long before he was able to escape the country?
It took him about 10 months to escape the country, but we left before that.
Yes.
So we tell them that we have to go to my grandmother's house. She's old, and we're going to visit her. And we just sort of pack a bag, and that was it. We get on the road, and this
on
was
the road. Is that like in a car? Is it in a train?
In a car.
In a car.
And we go straight to the border of Afghanistan, and then from there, my father's driver was an Afghani guy who, at that time during this, it was the Soviet and Afghan war. There was a lot of smuggling going on, so they put us part of the smuggling crew to get from Iran to Afghanistan, and then from Afghanistan we went to Pakistan. And from Pakistan, we went to Paris, but France didn't want any more Iranians in the country because this was after the hostage crisis. And this was like in 1980, 81, so right after the hostage crisis. But Spain was like, we'll take anybody. This was Spain, was part of Pan-Africa at that point. They didn't care who you were. They were like, you want to come to Spain? We'll take you. So we had visas to Spain, and we thought we were going to be in Spain for a few weeks, and then we were going to go somewhere. We ended up staying in Spain for 7 months in some dumpy hotel, and there was a bunch of other Iranian families who were also exiled there.
When you were fleeing Iran, how long was the trip in the car? Was it a day or two to the border?
It was 11 days. It was very slow. So there was a lot of checkpoints. Iran's borders were closed because, like I said, 6 million people left the country within 3 years because nobody wanted to be there anymore. All of a sudden, it became this Islamist country that people weren't used to. So Iran, the government was like, well, we can't let people leave because we need citizens. Yeah, so there was a constant checkpoints, and we had to be very careful that we didn't get caught. But
and so when you're at a checkpoint, do you tell them you're someone you're not? Are you hiding under clothes?
You also have to remember there was no technology back then, and it was very disorganized. Like if the top office sends, hey, make sure you're looking for Amir and his mother, by the time the message got there and they knew who it was and pictures, none of that stuff was there, and you could forge documents a lot easier. So it was. I tell you something crazy. I came to the U.S. without documents. I landed in JFK without a passport or a visa or anything like that, and claimed independency. And again, because there was things weren't organized.
It was different.
Yeah.
Well, the document's different. I think that's still happening today. But
also in terms of communication, I mean, the people just can't imagine the fact that this was before fax machines, right? So like, if I wanted to talk to you, I would be like, Kyle, make sure you're at this number at 3 p.m. next Sunday.
And you might wait there for a couple hours for you to show up.
Yeah, and if you weren't there, like I would have to call.
Payphone.
I would have to call the next Sunday and make sure that you're there.
Yeah. So okay, there's a lot to pay. So Afghanistan in the late 70s was in a fight with the Soviet Union. Was that over by the time you were going through Afghanistan, or was there
it
war
was
happening
there was
there?
still the smuggling in Afghanistan was rampant, and the opiate trade was at its peak in the 80s. So with drugs comes warlords, and with warlords come guns. And so Afghanistan became just a major drug route. I mean, like a smuggling route. So that country and the people in that country helped smuggle, millions of Iranians outside, to leave Iran at that point.
And so how long were you in Afghanistan?
In Afghanistan, we were probably there for 3 days. Afghanistan it's not what it is today. It's hard to imagine, but it was actually
better.
It was worse.
It was worse.
Yeah,
okay.
not worse in this. It was just not developed, right? So
it was like that. It's like Tatooine.
It was not very developed, and then so we went to Pakistan, and then Pakistan is just chaos. You have this tiny country with over 130 million people in it, or something like that.
Yeah.
And
primarily centered around was it the Ganges River? What's the river right there?
I don't know. But yeah, so we were in Pakistan for a short, for about a week, less than a week. And then we just wanted to get into a plane, any plane that was coming to Europe.
And so you went to France, then Spain?
The first place we could go to was Paris. And all of this had to happen without documents or visa. So like, it was like, which plane could we get on that, you could sort of get on the plane without documentation? Who did you know? Who did you have to bribe? Everybody's
I was going to say
bribing.
and then when you get there, like ideally they don't turn you away. And
Actually, Paris was, the French were very civil about it. When we didn't have documentation, they put us in a decent hotel, and they guarded us so that we wouldn't leave the hotel. But they didn't have a real system for it. So we actually had a person outside of our hotel room making sure that we didn't leave the hotel. And they were very nice about it.
That's not scalable, but that's very kind of them. Yeah.
Very civil, right? And then they were like, they helped us secure an actual visa, which Spain was willing to give us. And Spain gave us a 1-year visa to go there, which was great.
You're 8. What's going through your head when you're leaving? I mean, okay, you leave Iran, you're going through Afghanistan and Pakistan, very different countries than Iran, but still a similar region. Now you're going to Western Europe, which had to have been like an alien planet.
Yeah.
For everything you had known, assuming you hadn't really done a lot of traveling, right?
We went to Greece and places like that.
Okay,
But we talked. There was these brands that, as a child, I think anywhere in the world you're in, they get stuck in your head. And Mickey Mouse is one of them. McDonald's is another one. There was another brand I forget. But those are the things that my mom kept pushing on us. She was like, "We're gonna get there, and we're gonna have a Big Mac, and then we're gonna get one of those Mickey Mouse hats." And I was like, I just could not wait to go to McDonald's and get a Mickey Mouse. And I had no idea. I didn't know anything about Disney. I just knew Mickey Mouse and McDonald's. Like my cousins came back from the U.S. and they had pictures with a Big Mac and stuff, and I couldn't wait to try it. And
so
those are the things that
excited,
motivated us,
right? You were almost excited about this.
Yeah.
Very. Okay. And even though your dad, at this point, you're still more or less not in contact.
No, we would have this one day a week where we would have a phone number where my dad would call us. When if we had moved to another hotel or something through my uncle and my cousins, we would somehow get the word to my dad that this is the new phone number.
You knew at the time he was alive and doing his best to reunite.
Yeah, and there was always a phone that we had to be by on Sundays.
Yeah, this is how. Yeah, I mean, not nearly to that degree, but I definitely grew up in it. There was one phone, right, and made sure nobody was on it when you were expecting a call.
Right.
How much, we're going to cover professionally your accomplishments, but how much of who you are today, personally, professionally, do you think, assuming you've had time to reflect, can be traced back or a line drawn to that period of time where you're going through like tremendous adversity and turmoil in your life relative to most 8-year-olds?
Well, as an 8-year-old, you don't think about it. I think we talked about this earlier, but it's like, how are the parents in the house treating the situation? If they're like putting their head into their hands and saying, "Oh my God, this is the worst," then that's how you sort of deal with it. But then if they're like, "Hey, we're gonna go have McDonald's next week in France,"
look on the bright
then
side.
you have this positive outlook. I mean, I keep looking back to my parents because I'm older than my parents now, but they imagine being Kyle Matthews. You're in your house, you got your business, you got your 4 kids, you got your family, and all of a sudden tomorrow, government changes, and you got to pick up and go to Shenzhen, China, where you don't speak the language, you don't know anybody, you don't have any money, and you got to start from scratch as a 41-year-old. And your kids are going to be able to deal with it because one way or another, Kyle's going to put food on the table. And as a kid, you don't really go through the adversity. The first time I faced adversity was when I was in the U.S. and I had to go to school, and they just dropped me off at school, and I didn't speak any English. And I go to school, and everybody's speaking this foreign language, and I'm like, "What the hell is going on? I don't understand a word anybody's saying."
Adversity.
I just used to understand yes and no. Those are my 2 English words that I had learned.
And you're 8, 9 at the time?
I'm about close to 9 years old at this point, yeah.
All right, so I'm going to take the ball and run with it. So you land in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, well, we land in New York, in JFK. And then we didn't have any paperwork. And they were like, well, we're going to deport. We know you're from Iran. We're going to deport you. And the translator was an Iranian guy. And he was like, don't worry about anything. They can't do anything. She was like, just keep crying. So my mom's like, oh my God. And they're like, and then my uncle had an attorney waiting for us. But before you come into the country,
Was your uncle already here?
he was a doctor
Okay.
here in DC area.
Got it,
That's why we
okay.
went there. And he was like, you don't have, they were like, you have no rights. Like, you don't get a lawyer. Like, we're going to deport you. You have to tell us you're from Iran. And the translators like, absolutely don't say you're from, I mean, they knew we were from Iran, but we had to say it if they wanted to deport us. And the guy was like, absolutely don't say you're from Iran. Say that, just claim independency. Just claim independency. So we did that. And then finally they released us to our attorney. And then he drove us down to Washington, D.C., to my uncle.
When you were driving, when you left JFK, did you see the big city, New York, and say, one day I'm going to come back here?
I didn't see it. I crashed. I remember it was nighttime. It was dark. I just remember by the time we got to my uncle's house, Friday Night Videos was on. And I remember Billy Joel's Uptown Girl came on. And I saw Christy Brinkley in that video. I don't know if you've seen that video.
Yeah.
But I was like, holy shit, I love this country. And I was like, I've never seen somebody this beautiful in my life. And I was like 9 years old, and I saw Christy Brinkley talking to this ugly mechanic who's Billy Joel. And I was like, there's hope for everyone here. This is beautiful.
That's great. Yeah, American culture is a powerful force, man. I hope we can continue to put out good culture. But all right, so you're in D.C. It's your mom, you and your brother. Is your brother older or younger?
4 years older.
4 years older.
Yeah.
So you guys...
He really had to step up, my brother, because all of a sudden he was like a father figure for
Yeah.
me. And he had to make sure everybody in my family, we worked at a very young age. You know, as soon as I turned 11, like I used my brother's, I was 11 or 10 years old. I used my brother's Social Security to be a busboy at La Baguette in the mall, you know, working for $3.15. And
You're a big guy. Were you always big as a kid?
yeah, so it was passable.
I was going to say, so you passed yourself off as 15.
And then for the longest time, I was able to have this job I was so happy about, because after school I would go there, I would bus tables for 6 hours. And it was great. Every 2 weeks I would get a check for about $90, $96.
You're the richest guy you know.
And I was like, wow, this is incredible. And then finally, somebody at my school found out that I was working, and they reported me. And I had to pause. But I never stopped working. So even after that, I went and started working as a mover, because as a mover, they didn't ask for any documentation. So I was like a big 11-year-old, you know, and I was moving, and the money was like twice as much. It was like
good.
$6-7 an hour without any taxes being pulled out. So I did that for a few years,
So
which was great.
you're living at the time. It's just your mom, you and your brother. You guys are working a lot. Is your mom working now?
Yeah, she's working. She was like delivering pizzas and stuff like that.
Okay, and where I want to touch on the adversity in public school in DC. But when did your dad get reunited? How did that happen?
He joined us about 2 years after we landed in the U.S. So we were separated for about close to 3 years.
And how was that day?
It was great. I couldn't wait to
Because
see
you
him.
hadn't physically seen him.
No.
There was no Zoom calls. There was no
No.
FaceTime.
Nothing like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he found his way to the U.S. and it was very hard. It was very challenging for him, because imagine like you're this respectable person. You've worked very hard all your life. You raised a family, or tried to raise a family.
You said he was a judge.
Yeah.
Yeah, very.
And then all of a sudden he has to start from scratch, and that was a very challenging time. And my mom was younger; she was adaptable. You know, she became a nanny. She delivered pizza. She did whatever she had to do. But my father couldn't do any of that. He was like, "I can't go deliver pizza. Like this is beyond
Like a
me."
cab driver or something.
Yeah, he was like, "I can't do this." So he was trying to do other things that were
he's,
more in line with his capabilities.
Not humiliating, humbling. Like it's
It was very, and he had great pride, which it didn't allow him to just take any job.
Was he ever able to find his footing in the U.S.?
He never did, and in fact, for 4 or 5 years he didn't do anything. You know, it was like he was always looking to do something, but he couldn't get anything off the ground. And he waited for Khomeini to die, and when Khomeini died, he was like, I can't do anything here. I'm going to go back to Iran and try to get our assets back or sell our assets and stuff. And he went back there, and he was able to get his assets back to a degree.
okay.
And then other people were like, well, if you did it for yourself, can you also get my uncle's assets back, or can you get
So
my
that became
assets?
his business.
That became his business, going to the court, to the new Islamic courts, trying to apply Iranian laws and getting people's like assets back for them. And it was a business. It was some sort of a business. It was better for him than being in the U.S. and not doing anything.
Got it. So, all right. So you're, yeah, there's a lot to unpack. So you're now at a public school. You don't speak English. Did you just have to learn kind of trial by fire, or how did you survive in a school where you don't even speak the language of what they're teaching?
I still don't know how it happened. I think there was a lot of kind people, like kids at that age. When they see you being that vulnerable, they sort of want to. They also feel vulnerable, and they were very
That's
helpful
nice.
and nice. And
It helps being big.
Yeah, it helps being big. People want to befriend you, you know.
Yeah.
But everybody was like so nice. Everybody was so friendly. I remember going to my friends' houses that didn't speak English, and they would invite me over for a sleepover, and I would have a ham and cheese. I was like, this is the most delicious sandwich in the world. Why don't we have this in my house? Well, because it's not halal, Amir. That's why.
Did you the Big Macs and the ham and cheese? Did you put on some weight? Right, the American diet's not kind, but
It's delicious.
it is delicious.
Yeah.
That's the problem. All right, so you public school through high school?
Yeah. Oh, I was decent at basketball, so I went to a private school to play basketball. I went to St. John's to play basketball. St. John's.
Had you ever
high
played
school.
basketball before or no?
Yeah, I played basketball in high school and junior high and stuff like
I
that.
meant like in Iran. That
No,
wasn't,
no.
that wasn't a sport.
No, I just when I was in junior high, my one of my teachers was like, "You're tall, you should play basketball." And I started playing, and
Not wrong.
there was a sense of community.
You really should have played football.
Yeah.
I mean, like
Yeah.
you got football. That's probably even better because basketball you got to get to like 6'10", right? But
Can I tell you something about football that I always found interesting was that there's so many pieces on the football field. And people always assume that you know what every piece is supposed to do. With basketball, there's 5 people roughly doing the same things. Everybody's passing and rebounding and shooting. Roughly,
and generally the plays roll together that whatever position you play basketball, it is your responsibility to know the other 4 because they're so close they affect what you do.
which is not the case for football. So people would be like, Amir, you'd be a great tight end. You should go play football. And I was like, what does a tight end do? They're like, I like wide receiver. That's fun because I like catching the ball. They're like, no, you're not good for a wide receiver. I was like, why? I mean, like,
Well, tight end you get to catch every now and then, but you also got to get dirty and block. But I'll tell you just about football, we can move on, is when I was playing in high school and even into my first 2 years of college, I knew what I needed to do, and I thought that was enough. And if anybody asked me any defense, Tampa 4, cover 2, whether it's cover 3, cover 1, or zone blitzing, whatever it is, I could tell you exactly what I needed to do. But it wasn't until my junior year, for whatever reason, I actually will tell you how. My dad, who played in the NFL a long time, and he knows a lot of defenses, but the offenses had changed. He was now coaching a high school football team.
Yeah.
SC had a great defense. He goes, hey, Kyle, do you mind teaching me the defense at SC, how you run it? So I went to Pete Carroll. I said, hey, would you mind if I take a playbook home and I share my dad? And Pete's like, of course. Like, yeah, by all means. He's like, in fact, have him come to our meetings. So he came to some of our meetings. I had to teach my dad the defense, all of it. So it forced me to learn every position.
And your dad is like a Hall of Famer. He
yeah.
didn't know the other side of it.
No, he knew the defenses he played, but Pete was running a newer type of defense that wasn't necessarily as around as much when my dad was playing. But my point is, when I had to explain to my dad the entire defense, that's when it forced me to know. I played safety, what the D end was doing, or what the linebacker was doing, what the corner was doing, what the D tackle, and then you realize how it all works together.
Yeah.
And I think that lesson, very important. That was when my understanding of football really took off. And I'd ask you this question as someone who runs a large organization, over 100 people. It really is a great lesson for running a business. Like, it's hard to run a business if you're like, oh, well, I only deal with this one thing.
Yeah,
You need to know how the whole defense works together.
Well, especially when we launched the business. I mean, basically, I started with just me.
I was going to say, whether you want to or not, you're going to learn it.
Yeah, you're going to learn it because and then it came to a place where, especially when I had to fund it myself too. So I was like, well, I'm going to do this for as long as I can until I make enough money to have somebody else do this. And so I ended up doing everything myself until like I got to a place where I could hire somebody to do it. and I had to coach them how to do it the way I did it.
Straight up, or you know, one of my favorite things I could say is every single thing I asked you to do, I had to do myself.
Yeah.
And it makes me good at, or makes founders ideally good at coaching it, but definitely from an accountability.
Well,
You know,
it gave us a huge advantage because even the distribution of the magazine, okay, we at that point we were printing maybe in early 2000s, we were probably printing around 25,000 copies.
were you like Dave Portnoy going around the city?
Yeah. And like, so out of those 25,000, 6,000 of them had to be distributed by me. So I would go to all the newsstands with my friends, and we would go to I know exactly how many newsstands are in the city. And, you know, to have your magazine in the newsstands don't exist anymore. But back then there was 286 newsstands in this Manhattan. So from top down, we would go over the weekend, we would do this all day long. And I would go to these newsstands, I would place it front and center, and I cared about it, and I would make sure it gets good viewing in the glass or whatever it was. And it's a huge play for us where the real deal is showing on top of Forbes.
Sure.
Because those guys don't care. Those guys have somebody throwing it out there.
Someone who's getting paid an hourly wage just to check the box.
And I
do
would
the
talk
job.
to these guys, and I would like, hey, can I put it here? I'll give you extra 25 cents for every copy that you sell. And they were like, oh, put it in the glass. And for me, that was incredible marketing because people would be like, oh, yeah, I saw the real deal on newsstands.
You know, you hustled and you cared more, and those two combinations in concert with each other are very effective. Now, with the real deal within the industry of journalism, I want to see how you got there. So you're at high school, are you getting good grades? You learned
No.
No?
No, I was a very poor student.
Was it because of the English, or you just didn't care as much?
I was no, it was my English was good by the time I got into high school. Too good. That's what got me into trouble. But I was very I was a poor student in high school. I was just more focused on playing basketball and hanging out with friends. And luckily, I didn't drink or smoke or anything like that in high school. But my grades were generally pretty poor. And then after high school, like I couldn't get a scholarship. I couldn't get anything. My grades were so bad. Even like the Division III schools didn't want to touch us. And then my brother was like, okay, you've done it your way all through high school. Now we're going to do it my way. And he was very good. He was, you know, he went to Harvard, he got his PhD and all this stuff.
Wow, okay.
And he was like, we're going to do it my way. And I went to junior college, and he was like, your first 2 years don't matter anyways. So he was like, let's just get you in school. And the first 2 years, we just build up your grades and, you know, show people that you can be a student. And I just followed his curriculum for the first 2 years. I brought up my grades. I became like, you know, Phi Theta Kappa or whatever, you know, one honorable student at junior high. And he was at Harvard at the time, and he really wanted me to go to school in Boston too, so we could live together.
That's cool.
So
what was he studying?
He was studying linguistics.
Okay,
and,
so not journalism.
No.
Okay.
And he was like, and I went to school in Paris for 6 months. I followed this girl, which was a great experience. And then my brother calls me. He was like, I submitted your application on your behalf to Northeastern University, and you got in. I was like, I couldn't believe I got into a real school. I was like, oh my God,
This is coming out of junior college?
I was coming out of junior college, and and he was like, I submitted you're going to Northeastern. I was like,
You got a good brother.
I was like, this is amazing. I was like, I can't believe this. He was like, but he was like, hold on. I also submitted you to BC and BU and all these other schools. And I got into BU too. So
did you have good grades in junior college?
In junior college, I did.
Okay.
Yeah, because then I focused on it.
I was going to ask, did just a switch go off? Was it your brother sitting you down and giving you a talk? Were you just, for whatever reason, maybe developmentally, you just hit that point where you're like, hey, it's time to grow up? Or
I felt like a loser.
Okay.
And I had like my friends who all went to colleges and stuff. And I had to go to junior college, and I was like,
So
I don't want to
bad
come.
self-esteem.
I was like, I don't want to think about myself like that again. You know, like, yeah. So I was like, I'll do whatever you say. So I just followed my brother Ali, and I was like, just tell me what classes to
Your
take.
brother Ali sounds like very much a mentor to you.
Yeah, he was like a father figure. You know, he was always there, and he was like.
And did
managing.
he actually teach you from a mentorship, like the actual right way to study and prep? Because clearly at Harvard, he probably was doing something.
He was great. He was great at that and he wouldn't let me take any bullshit classes. He was like, take this class because this will help you with this. And he was like, this is how you study for the history class. And he had already done it. So he was like, you know, now you go on anything I want to learn, you know, I go on YouTube and I teach myself. But like to like all of a sudden go to school and learn how to be a great student was not an easy thing to do. And it wasn't just about reading and putting time into it. And there's this great quote by Ernest Hemingway that he says, "Never mistake motion for action." And I remember seeing these kids in the library, and they were, they would be there for 6 hours, but they would get like 30 minutes of work done, and that was just motion, And action was like me going there and be like, okay, I don't want to be in the library for 6 hours. I want to learn everything as fast as I can because I got to go to work tonight. So I would just be there, like action, like really, hunkering down and trying to learn as much as I could in the hours I was there.
Were you in Paris when your brother told you, or you got into Boston University?
I was in Paris. Yeah, I was over the moon. I couldn't believe
You
it
had a
because
big
I didn't think I'd go
celebration?
to a real school. I was like, I was in this bullshit junior college. I was in Paris now for 7 months, 8 months.
He had your application. He probably wrote a nice
Essay.
essay about your fleeing Iran. How could you
Probably.
say no?
I don't even know what the essay
yeah.
was. I never got to ask him. That's a good question. I should ask him
Yeah.
what the essay
Oh,
is.
yeah, you don't even need to. I could tell you he leaned into that because that story is incredible, and it really is overcoming tremendous adversity, and especially my, stereotyping the admissions officer at a Boston University, bleeding heart, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to help this person.
It worked.
Which
Whatever
again,
he did.
you can make the argument that that's how they should be looking at it, but it worked. You got into Boston University, which is a phenomenal school. How did you end up in journalism?
Well, when I was in school, I was a good writer. So my teachers were always like, you're a great writer, Amir. So I was like, all right, well, I should pursue that. And for some reason, I thought journalism was creative writing, and it wasn't. Thank God it wasn't. And I went into journalism because I thought, hey, being a reporter is pretty cool. And so I started taking journalism classes, and I really liked it. And I just pursued that. And, I pursued the journalism field. And I really admired my professors. They were all experienced reporters, Russia bureau, Cambodia. Like they had like traveled the world, and they were teaching us about reporting and news. I was like, these guys are cool. Like they traveled everywhere. They weren't living for
Yeah, they're
money. They were
badass.
like they're 3 times divorced,
making
alcohol problems. I was like, these guys rock.
Well, ideally making a difference, certainly.
Yeah.
They mattered.
Well, look, the media and the press, they have a real important job. What it is today is not exactly how it was envisioned, but neither is our politics, right? Like government is not exactly, Congress is not
functioning
operating the way that
What
we
did they say?
envisioned it.
Is it media is the fourth arm of the government? Is that what it is?
Yeah, something like
the
that. I
hidden
forget.
arm? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's we have to hold people accountable. We have to ask the questions that the masses are thinking about.
Do you think they're doing that today in media?
I think there's a lot of good media out there. I just think there's a lot of media out there. We used to rely on a handful of people to represent the media, but now anybody can go out there. Elon Musk always says, "Oh, the Twitter media is the best," and to some degree, it's good because you get a lot of information out there. But at the same time, there's no accountability. Like if a reporter writes a story, he has to be able to prove that to his editor, to his publisher, to his audience, to his readers.
You would like to think that.
They should.
I think there's some right down the street that from a standards probably isn't adhering to the standards they had 30, 40 years ago.
Well, I think I don't know. I think there's also a responsibility to make sure good things happen, and you hold the bad things accountable and bring light to the bad things.
There's a lot of values, obviously information, education, but that was one of the greatest values of real journalism is that transparency.
Yeah, and nobody goes into journalism because they want to own a yacht. Right?
So
They become journalists because they want to make a difference in the world. And I think there's something beautiful about that. And people who become journalists, they're not making $200,000-$300,000 a year. I don't care what paper they're writing for, how important their articles are. They cap out, and they do it for the rest of their life. Nobody becomes a journalist and says, now I'm going to go become a banker. Although Steve Ratner from the hedge fund there is a different story. But here's a story of a guy who's like, these people are stupid. I'm so much smarter than them. He used to write for the New York Times finance section. And now he has like one of the great hedge funds.
I heard about that. So let's talk about getting into journalism. So you graduate college, what happens?
So I graduated college, and I wanted to go to I really wanted to go to the Boston Globe. Going to school in Boston, I thought it would be so cool. And the Boston Globe was like, you can't work here. I was like, all right, well, then I guess I'll have to go to the Boston Herald. And the Boston Herald was like, you can't work here. So I was like, damn it, what am I going to do? I didn't have a plan C. And I started talking to my friend who was graduating at the same time. And I was like, I have an idea for a magazine in Southern California, because they don't, like New York Magazine or, Gotham Magazine or something, like a social magazine, but for Southern California, that they didn't have that there. And I was like, we should go to Southern California. We'll get money from a bank and we'll start a magazine. And this is
Naturally.
like a lot of these 23-year-olds who give advice. So we take
If you
our
had a Twitter account, you probably
could have done
had
it.
a lot of followers. Yeah.
So we drive across the country with my Macintosh, which was like, all encompassing Macintosh. And we have this, we put these decks together on these big cardboard papers. And we didn't know the difference between a retail bank and a regular bank and an investment bank and all this stuff. So we walk into a regular, SunTrust. And we're like, we want to start a magazine. Who do we talk to about getting some money for that? We need $380,000 for the first issue. And they're like, well, this is not that kind of a bank. You got to go talk to a real banker. And we talked to all these people and nobody wanted to give us money. And it was beyond me. I was like, why wouldn't anybody give us money? I mean, I know we don't have any experience, and I know we've never done this before, but this is a brilliant idea.
No assets, no
collateral.
assets,
no collateral. Why wouldn't somebody give us this? Yeah. And we looked at our business model, and it was which was basically 2 pages of paper. But we were like, well, the most expensive cost is the printing. So we're like, if we could secure the printing, we could do a lot of the other work ourselves and put money together.
You said, let's go to Mexico.
Then we were like, let's go to Mexico, because everything in Mexico is cheaper, except it turns out printing. Printing is like 10 times more expensive in Mexico than in the U.S.
That's fine. You started a paper, Gringo Gazette, when you were down there.
South of the border. South of the border,
sorry,
Gringo Gazette, yeah.
Bought by Gringo Gazette.
Yeah. And so we started that paper.
Was it like bought for $1 or was it bought for
$60,000?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So that's
60-something thousand.
So enough to where you're like, okay, you probably learned a lot of hard lessons. And so if you were to do it again, it wasn't a bad experience in that you're probably going to be better the second time, but you did make a little money.
Yeah, it was great. I was 23 years old or 22 years old. $60,000 for me was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that gave me enough money to start my next paper.
That's what I was going to say. So do you go back to DC from Mexico and start the Washington Free Press?
Yes.
All right. And what is the Washington Free Press?
So the Washington Free Press was supposed to be the anti-establishment paper of Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is a very conservative city. A lot of people don't think that now, but the Washington Post was very conservative. And even like they're...
No longer.
But no longer, well, I mean, to a degree it is, but it's not the New York Post, for example. I wanted to start the New York Post of Washington, D.C.
And isn't the New York Post now considered conservative? See, it's funny how everything's cyclical and these things will go back and forth over long enough period of time.
By conservative, I mean like in style and format. So it wasn't like a tabloid paper. So like, the New York Post is a tabloid
understand.
paper.
I thought you were talking like politically. I was like, yeah, the Post.
To a degree, that too, yeah. But so, I mean, the way that the Post covers stuff, in some things they're very conservative. And
so
some
you were
things
going
aren't.
more for tabloid, like a little sensationalist.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Understood.
And I thought there was a good market for that.
And what year
DC.
was this?
This was in the mid 1990s, like 97 or 96 or something.
How did it go?
It went really well. Believe it or not, running the paper in Mexico was a lot easier than doing it in DC, because in Mexico, like I would go to, I don't know if you remember the company MCI, but it was like AT&T basically at the time. And we would go to MCI, and MCI would be like, we were the only English-speaking paper in that part of Mexico, and there was over 100,000 Americans who lived right at the border, and most of them didn't speak Spanish.
There
was a need for it. And, we printed this thing weekly and distributed it. And I really liked living there. And it was so easy. We were like, we're the only English-speaking newspaper in this part of Mexico. And everybody was advertising with us. When I came to do the Washington Free Press, people were like, what? No.
What's the need? Yeah.
Why are we doing this? Well, it was like, look at the content. The content's so different. And we had a section called Crime Stories. And it was like all the crazy crime that happened in Washington, D.C. And it was like...
Do you think just culturally maybe the city wasn't ready for it, or did it do really well? I don't.
it didn't do well, but it had a voice. So that started people talking, and I was so ingrained into that community. Like every local business owner knew me. Because it was just knocking on doors and be
Yeah.
like, "Hey, you own this business? You need to advertise." And it was just like nonstop. So everybody knew me in that regard, and they probably saw me as this kid, and they were like, "Look at this young guy, like
Yeah.
every day out there." And they wanted to. I really loved the people who wanted to support that. So they were like, "Hey, I only have a bar, but I can give you $350 for like a little ad." But that stuff for me was a lot. I would like, that's
Sure,
all I
yeah.
want. That pays for
Absolutely.
my gas for the week.
What caused you to sell it or to unwind it?
And we had this. We had this. There was another paper in Washington D.C. Called the City Paper. It was sort of the village voice of Washington D.C. And it was like a real business, And they always liked they liked the voice that we had. So we started talking to them and stuff, and eventually they took over our
Yeah, okay.
business, but not for any sort of money or anything like that. They took over all of our debts and stuff, made sure everybody was paid, and sort of it wasn't a success. Let me say that.
But a graceful exit, as they call it.
Yeah.
So, all right. So this leads me to your next thing, which gets into the real deal. But first, you're like, hey, I want to learn more about publishing. You had two startups. I'm sure you got a real life education on both, but you wanted a more formal education. You went back to school.
Yeah, I went to learn publishing because I didn't have any publishing.
And where'd you go?
I went to Emerson College.
Okay.
And back in Boston, my brother was still there. And then almost immediately, I find out that I know more than all of my teachers at this point. So
Because you had that experience.
yeah, and also like the business had changed. Like how we talked about, I had to change my business model a bunch of times. At this point, technology had come into play, but at school they were still teaching kids about galley proofs and things like that. I was like, nobody in the real world is operating this.
Did you finish your degree?
No, I went
you
to
just
the dean and I told him, I was like, you guys are teaching things that don't exist. Like it hasn't existed for years.
How do you take that?
He was like, we know we have to upgrade.
Okay,
We know we have to upgrade the curriculum, but the professors that we had used to be a professor and do it for
I was
20
gonna say,
years.
this is-
And you were like, you learn your experience and you go and teach. But now all of a sudden, these days, if you're not in the field for you're out of the field for 3 years, you're irrelevant.
Yeah, the rate of evolution, especially on the technology side,
insane.
is incredible.
So the professor totally understood it. And I was like, well, let me go to New York and learn from the big guys about publishing. So I got a job at Random House, and I never showed up for that job because there's a guy who's like, you got to come. The internet's the future. You got to work at an internet company. You'll make $1 billion, and it'll be great. But I was like, I got a job. I got to start on Monday. And the guy who was starting the Yahoo offices in New York, he was a legend because he had sold the first banner ever, like the first banner ad. So he was like sort of a respectable guy.
And you could go work for him. How? And so this was the Yahoo office in New York.
This was E-Groups, which got bought by Yahoo, but he was the guy who launched it, and their plan was always for them.
We touched on it earlier in the intro, but you worked at Yahoo for a couple of years.
For a year.
For a year, how was that?
It was horrible, because I was not used to working for anybody, and I would get my work done really fast. So I would what do I do with the rest of the time? And I came up with a newspaper for Yahoo. I was like, Yahoo has 35,000 employees across the country or across the globe. They need a newsletter, like a digital newsletter. So I put together this Yahoo News sort of a newsletter. And my managers were like, oh, Amir, we want to have a meeting with you. I thought they were like, we're going to promote you to be VP of communication.
You're making them look bad.
And they were like, when did you use company computers to put this together? And when did you do it? This and that. And they were like, you cannot do this. You can't spend your time doing this stuff. You got to spend your time on doing the things we give you. And I was like, guys, this is not going to work.
Why do you think they were saying that? Especially if you're getting your work done.
Yeah. There was, to be honest, I don't know. They didn't want any sort of examples of that. I think it's at those big companies, they have to have systems in place.
Like conformity.
Yeah, they need that for it to work, I think. And but for me, it was like being in prison. It was like the worst thing that I could do.
Yeah, I sometimes I've used the analogy of being in a line, and they're like, "Hey, you're in the back of the line, and we can't have you do anything that would risk you jumping spots in line. You're just in the line, and if you just do what we tell you over 20, 30, 40 years, you'll move up in the line, and maybe one day you'll get to the front of the line.
Yeah.
But we're in the line ahead of you.
Yeah.
And if you shine, you are almost a threat or a risk. I don't know if this is a real thing, but for me, I've always looked at these bigger companies like there are these career progressions that are understood over a very long period of time, and that when the individual shines,
Yeah.
the people ahead of them risk getting jumped or leapt, and so they're like, "Hey, don't do any of that. Just conform,
Yeah.
and keep your place in line." And so,
But thankfully I didn't, and I don't think I was capable of it.
no, I just look. It gets to nature, I was like, or nurture, and maybe yours is both, but from a nature and a nurture perspective, it sounds like you were born and or raised to be an entrepreneur. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I can't imagine working for anybody else. It's very tough.
Is
for
your
me.
brother like that, or he's oldest child?
He's just like, please give me a job and you stay out of my way. Let me just hang out with my daughter.
So you're at Yahoo for a year. It just wasn't the right fit. Whether you learned at the job because of what you did, or you learned that actually wasn't the job or the career for you, value there. 2003, I'm going to jump forward a little bit. You found The Real Deal. What happened from leaving Yahoo to founding The Real Deal? Like, what was that period of time like?
Well, I came to New York, and the first thing I noticed in New York is that, oh my God, everything is so expensive here. Like, my rent was so expensive. Everything was extremely expensive. So I was like, I got to reduce my rent. So I had to come to Brooklyn. This is before Brooklyn was being gentrified.
Yeah.
And so I moved to Brooklyn. I was like, I don't care. Like, I'll live anywhere. Like, it's New York City. It's like, people are like, oh my God, you live in Brooklyn? Is this safe?
Nowadays, Brooklyn's
And
popping.
then, now it's the happening spot. But back then, I was like, as long as I'm near the train, there's no stopping me. So I bought a place in Brooklyn, and I would commute into the city, and I had no problems with it. And when I lost my job at Yahoo, the September 11th happened. And when September 11th happened, I couldn't get a job for the life of me. There was
Where
no
were you
market.
on that day?
I was in Brooklyn, and I was I remember I had just come back from visiting Iran, and my brother calls me. He was like, "Hey, have you seen the news?" I was like, "No, what's going on?" He was like, "Turn on the TV and call me right back." I turned on the TV. I went to call him back. All the phone lines are dead. And I was like, what? I was like, this can't be. So I go up on my roof because you could see the towers from my roof. And I go up there. I was like, is World Trade Center is on fire? That's insane. And then as I'm watching this, I see another bang in the other tower. I'm like, I couldn't, and I'm there on the roof with everybody else. It was like 9:30 in the morning or something. And I'm like, did we just experience this happening? And I was like, what is happening? And I went downstairs to look at the TV, and people didn't know what was happening for
When
a
the
few
second
hours.
plane hit, I think very quickly they realized there was an attack happening. With the first plane, it was
It was still unknown. Like, people still didn't know, why is this, and why these two towers. It's like weird that like these two towers are target. I mean, at the time I thought it was weird, and then the phones are off that whole day. And anyways, like, that happened. That really brought this whole city together. I remember people wanting to go into this dead zone and helping the people, like, pull people out and go through the rubble. And it was like a really beautiful thing. And I remember it got to a place where the mayor had to come and say, we don't need any more people to come down here. Please don't come down to this site because we don't need any more help. And I was thinking to myself, it's very nice to see all these privileged, entitled, like, New Yorkers who always feel like they deserve something to like put everything aside and be like, I'm going to go down to the rubbles and help everybody out.
It's cliche. It's sad that it has to happen in those circumstances, but sometimes that's what brings people together. Okay. So you're sitting there on the roof.
And then I couldn't find a job after that, and it was like a very tough market. And I tried getting a job, and I just couldn't. It was like a very down time. 2001 was very depressed in New York, and I was like, I got to get the hell out of New York. And I went to sell my condo that I had bought for $105,000, and without me knowing, because I wasn't really into real estate, it was valued at $360,000. I was like, wow, this is incredible. Maybe I could do another deal like this, because that's much better than working for somebody, And then I would buy, this is before there was any sort of tech in the industry. So I would buy from local Brooklyn brokers, and I would sell through Manhattan brokers. And I would literally buy and sell, and it would all happen like within a month or 2 months. Like I would buy it and immediately put it back on the market, and I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And I ended up doing like 16 of those deals, like townhouses and 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms.
You were doing those ninja loans, you know, subprime, stated income.
Well, anything I could get, which
I think
they were.
I think that might have led to the greatest bubble.
I was responsible for the Great Recession.
Yeah, you might have contributed to it, but
No, but it was great because they would do these interest-only loans, and you know, I didn't have a job, right?
I owe 103% of purchase price. A little extra to, you know, for some TIs or some improvements.
But it would never even get to that level. And then I would keep going deeper and deeper into Brooklyn, and there was always a market. There was these young white kids. They were looking for better deals than Manhattan.
Regentrification.
Yeah. And they were like, what? Okay, you're near the train. Good enough for us. We're teachers or whatever it was.
The yuppies are coming to town. So is that what kind of got you interested in the real estate industry?
Yeah, well, what happened was that I was always looking for information on real estate because I was like, where can I find information on what I'm doing? And you know, there wasn't anything that was real. It was the New York Times. Their highest grossing section was the real estate section, and they didn't have any dedicated reporters or people who actually knew the field to write about it. And I thought, you know what? I did this one deal that wasn't supposed to happen. I was like, look, I'm going to take this one deal that didn't, the money from this deal, and put it towards this magazine that I'm going to start. So I just put together the first issue. I put together myself, and I wrote all the articles myself.
And this was the real deal.
This was the real deal.
How'd you come up with the name?
Well, real is real estate.
No, yeah, it's a great name. I always ask this question, and sometimes there's this well thought out process, but most of the time it's just this. I don't know. I just called it this.
Had a ring to it, yeah. And and I remember I had to get the website, and you know, the trademark was owned by Evander Holyfield, who was a world champion boxer.
The real deal Holyfield, yeah.
The real deal Evander Holyfield. And so I contacted his offices in Houston, and some guy picks up the phone, and I was like, yeah, I want to buy the trademark. He's not using it anymore. And they were like, yeah, that trademark's actually expired. You could have it for, you know, $115. I was like, I can't afford that kind of money. He was like, you can't afford $115? I was like, oh, $115 for the trademark? He was like, yeah. I was like, oh, you got a deal, man. He was all right. He was like,
for a second, I thought you meant you couldn't afford $150. Like, man, times are tough. Let's talk about
I thought he meant
that.
$115,000.
No,
and I was like, well, I can't afford $115,000. And then so I did the deal with him. And at the time, I was like, you know, for the very first issue, I didn't want people to think it was a small company, so I would use different names that were familiar. So, I would be like, you remember David Brinkley? I would be like, I'm Charlie Brinkley. And, you know, Peter Jennings, I would be Eric Jennings.
You're talking about the author of the article?
The article.
Yeah,
so I would use these pseudonyms so people wouldn't think Amir Korangy is writing all the stories, because then they would think I'm like the small, working out of my apartment in Brooklyn, which was the true case of the matter.
All right, so you start The Real Deal in 2003. What was the first, you know, you don't have to take too long to summarize, like, what were the first couple of years like? What, did it go faster than you thought? Was it tougher? I mean, this is your third startup effectively.
Yeah, so. I didn't sleep. And there was no weddings, there was no birthdays, there was no family reunions.
So you got me to my favorite topic. You did it all on your own. It's work-life balance.
There was no balance. But for me, it was the best thing in the world. And the people who were with me, they also felt the same way. You know, they were also pretty much living in my apartment.
So you had employees or contractors at the time?
For the first issue, I didn't. For the first issue,
that industry works. But.
For the first issue, I wrote everything myself, and then I was like, I can't do this. And then I went to Columbia University looking for cheap reporters and writers. So I went around passing out flyers, and then this dean sees me, and he says, this is not the right way to do it. Let me put you in touch with some real journalists. And he put me in touch with Stuart Elliott, who became my partner, and he was at the New York Times. But he was formerly he was a Columbia alum, and I reached out to him and I was like, hey, the dean put me in touch with you. Do you want to write stories for us? He was like, sure, I'll do that on the side. I was like, I only pay 5 cents a word. He was like, I don't care. I just want to have a byline. I was like, I like that attitude.
Hell yeah.
And then he came and joined me. And finally I told him, I was like, do you want to be a reporter at the New York Times, or do you want to come to my apartment and be the editor of The Real Deal? He was like, I want to be the editor of The Real Deal.
I thought you were going to pull out the line your buddy from Yahoo's like, come here and you'll make $1 billion.
No, none of the, well, the funny thing is, now Stuart makes more money than the editor of the New York Times. So it panned out for him. So it worked out better for him.
Funny how that happened. So, what was your life like those first couple of years? Like,
It was just nonstop work. I mean, we worked 24/7. If I was awake, I was working on something. And like I mentioned to you earlier, I didn't hire somebody to do anything until I just physically or mentally could not do it, because anybody I paid, it meant it was coming out of my own pocket.
yeah, and I always say real entrepreneurs are cursed with the same 24 hours that everyone else weighs, and your limitation ultimately just becomes time.
Yeah, you just crash.
Short of you just sleeping less and less, which not sustainable, and even people try that. If your business grows, you run out of time.
And you just one thing you realize is what you're actually capable of. And when I was in my 20s, you realize that, oh my God, I could stay awake for 36 hours. I didn't know that before. Like physically, I could stay awake for 36 hours. Now I can't do that. I got fat and lazy. But back then, I was like, I have to get this done. There's nobody else is going to do this if I don't do it.
With you just working all the time, total savage hours, what do you say to a young worker that you're interviewing, at The Real Deal, or someone who's already there, or anyone in any profession, could be real estate brokerages, like, well, what about work-life balance? Like, I want to come in, I want to grow, I want to build a career. Maybe one day I want to start a company, but I also want balance.
Yeah, that I don't know about that world, and I can't imagine somebody's going to understand my world either, because it's not for everybody. And thank God, because otherwise it would be I would have a lot of competitors.
Yeah,
not everybody can do that. I don't think everybody's suited for that. And I don't think what I did was very normal. I certainly can't recreate it. It takes. But I tell my guys that if you're not hungry, like literally hungry, then you're not incentivized to stay out, outside and kill something to bring back food to eat. So if you have food in the fridge and you're like, well, I'll just wait until the weather gets warmer, or I'll wait until tomorrow after I had my rest. But if you're really hungry, which I really was, like I was really trying to make this thing work. So I just I would set these crazy goals for myself where I would like literally go, again, door to door to every brokerage and be like, hey, have you heard of The Real Deal? Take out of that. I would literally not come home until I had some sort of a contract. And never forget, there was this one guy, which I'm very grateful for. And I told him, I was like, I cannot go home until I get this contract. So he was like, what is the smallest ad you have? I'll take that ad so you can fucking go home. Yeah. And I was like, finally, he took out an ad. He became a longtime advertiser who I was very grateful for. But I always had that mentality. They're like, look, people's first response to you is generally going to be no. I mean, what's going to set you apart is like convincing them to be, from taking them from that no to that yes, because everybody's going to say no. There's no business deal where you walk into and they're like, yes, let's do it. This is fantastic. I mean, it happens sometimes, but the stuff that makes your company is not the yeses.
You're not going to go to most people and say, hey, I'd like for you to take ad space. And they're like, you know what? Thank you so much.
Thank you for calling.
I've been waiting for someone to offer me this. Yeah, absolutely. There's a line that I've heard over the years. I always like, it says it's hard to be hungry when your belly is full. And it's like you're saying literally hungry, but you have to, it's like you either go out and, and then eat what you kill mentality. You better go out and find success selling ad space or selling real estate, or you're going to literally and or metaphorically within your career starve.
Yeah. Or then you just become, and which is fine. I think, and I always tell my guys, look, if you think you're a business leader or if you want to be an entrepreneur, that's great. But like, it's really, you save yourself a lot of time and a lot of headache when you identify who you are. Because some people are just amazing team players. They're not meant to be coaches or team captains. They're meant to be support players. And when they realize that position and when they realize that's who they are and they're able to operate in that, they know that's their role.
Team can win a lot of games.
They're amazing. And they become absolutely valuable and they'll succeed in that field. The issue now is that everybody feels like they have to go and be the team leader and be an entrepreneur. And which is great. If you can do it, fantastic. If you
Most
have it in
people
you.
aren't built like that.
Most people aren't, because you do need to have that sort of psychotic,
psychotic,
psychotic mentality.
Speaking of which, I want to dive into your psyche. You're building the real deal. Like, what were your motivations? What was your why at the time?
I really knew that I didn't want to work for anybody, and I knew I had to have some kind of a business. And I really loved the idea of media and newspapers and magazines. The idea that I would write something and thousands of people, now millions of people, read it. And that gave me a real high. And that gave me my purpose. I was like, I want to be in this field where I write something and thousands of people are reading that thing as
What is that? Is Maslow's hierarchy? Is that affirmation? Like
maybe
the feeling of being valuable and being important?
Yeah, and having value to the civilization and to society. Yeah, I felt like I was contributing. And, my cousin was a big-time banker here in New York. He's one of the reasons I came to New York, because I got comfortable visiting him. And he was at Blackstone, and he was making a lot of money. And I was like, I could never do this job. I could just never come into this office and sit here for 14, 15 hours looking at these Excel sheets. And, he was really good at that. And he thrived in it, and he succeeded, and he lives a very nice life. I just couldn't do it. I'd rather do something that I really felt like I was contributing to than trying to just, make a living.
What was the first big moment in the Real Deal's history where you said, like, wow, this might actually work. This might actually be big. Like, what was that big moment where you're like, okay, this has
There was
legs?
a couple. There was this company called Bruce Wasserstein, who was the shark of Wall Street. His love was not being a financial billionaire, but his love was publishing. So he would buy all these newspapers and magazines. He bought New York Magazine and all these other places. And he found a lot of interest in real estate at the time. Real estate, a lot of people don't know this, but real estate was a very slow growth industry before the 2000s. People are seeing the last 20 years and they're like, wow, real estate is so exciting and new. But it wasn't. We're experiencing the greatest boom in real estate in the U.S. history.
A decade of loose credit, then following a decade of effectively zero interest rates, it helps.
Yeah, I mean, that helped the greatest boom in real estate history. So this guy saw this, there was all this interest in real estate, and he was like, I want to buy the real deal. And we were like in my apartment, and we're like, we just did an interview with Donald Trump, and you know what, let's hold on to it for another year. Value is probably going to go up higher. And next thing I know, I get a letter, he's suing us. And from one of these white shoe law firms, Aiken and Gump, that we are breaching on his trademark because he owned a tabloid magazine called The Deal. And their lawsuit said that because we're saying we're the real deal, that the deal is not real. And that was their whole federal lawsuit that they took us to court for. And, trademark lawsuits are extremely expensive because your lawyers not only have to be an attorney, but they also have to be an engineer. So you're paying a minimum of like $1,000 for a trademark attorney. And so these guys were so nasty about it, and they got so ugly, and they thought that they knew I was living in my house, doing it out of my house, out of my apartment. They're like, we know you have it in your house. We're going to sue you, and we're going to come after you. We're going to take your house away from you and all this stuff. And I was like, you know what? At this point, I'd rather like burn it all down to the ground than to see you guys take this thing. Like I'd rather destroy it. And so I was like, let's go to court. And we went to court, and I had to date my trademark attorney at the time because I couldn't afford to pay her. But then she was great. And she was like a sort of a young woman who was a trademark attorney. And we would go to court, and I would see the other side, and these guys came in like these amazing suits. I never forget this guy, Michael Johnson. He was a trademark attorney at Aiken and Gump. I was a partner, and I would look at this guy. He would speak during the court case. I would like, man, I was like, I wish he was my attorney. He's so good. And he knew the judge, and was like, Judge, but from the last case last week, we talked about this thing, and she was like, no, Michael, and I was like, what the hell is going on here? But one thing we had that was helpful for us was that I knew everybody in the media world. Like New York, at the end of the day, it's a small world. Like you go to a party and all the reporters and journalists from the Post and the Times and New York Magazine, all these guys were all hanging out at the same parties. So we started to leak some stories about this case where it looked like we had the support of Mort Zuckerman. So Mort Zuckerman was backing the real deal, which was not the case. But Mort Zuckerman from Boston Properties, who's like the billionaire. And we were saying, we were leaking these things that Mort Zuckerman's backing us because he hates Bruce Wasserstein. And it's the battle of these billionaires, going after the real deal. And we would keep leaking these stories, and the Post and the Observer loved these stories. And the guys from Wasserstein's camp didn't know we were planting these stories, and they went for a summary judgment, and we ended up winning. And that was a very important moment, because when we beat those guys, I didn't think we were going to win. I mean, they were so good.
So they went for a summary judgment, which means, hey, let's skip the trial. This is so egregious. Judge, rule for us right now.
Right now.
And the judge goes, no, we're going to let this. And that's when they're like, do I actually want to spend?
Yeah. And then the judge was like, the judge decided that, they didn't have a case. There was like bogus. And, had to take the stand. And it was like I didn't think we had a chance in hell. And we went for summary judgment. We won the case. And that was a moment for us. I was like, wow, I cannot believe we came out of this, because I was sure we were going to lose the case. And, it went on for 6 months. So I had to run the paper, keep the same hours, and also prepare for these different court cases. And we came out of it, and I was like, wow, this is incredible. And it was 13 months to the day that I had started where the case was released. And I went to do my books, and I was like, wow, we made $100 last month. We were in the black. Finally, we're in the black with 100 and some change.
That's when you knew.
I was like, wow, not only did we win the case, we also made $113.
Did you have any financial partners at the time at The Real Deal?
No, thank God, because I went to all these different publishers when I first started. I went to Bruce Wasserstein before I started The Real Deal. And I was like, hey, I want to start this paper. Do you guys want to invest in it? And everybody was like, well, what are you going to write about real estate? No, nobody wants to read about real estate. It's not interesting. I was like, well, nobody's writing about it. That's why it's not interesting. And thank God nobody wanted to invest in us. And then that was the end of it. And so to this day, we're wholly owned 100%.
That's fantastic. Matthews is too. I just never thought I didn't even know people would invest in a company. I never thought to even go around that. I just was like, oh, I guess I'm just going to do this.
Yeah.
So,
well, yeah.
It's better now. It's just the first couple of years, you can only grow as fast as the money comes in.
Well, it's also, the money I feel like makes you a little bit lazier, but it also helps you grow faster.
It does. And in tech, as an industry, that's much more relevant, because if you have the right technology or software, you have to grow as quickly as possible, because very soon somebody's going to figure out how to copy it.
In tech, in early 2000s or the first part of the aught years, you could just literally be an engineer and make it happen. In the second part of the aught years, there's real cost to tech. There's real computing costs. And now that's happening again. So you can't just go and say, I have a great AI platform I'm going to do. You need billions of dollars just to be able to compute this.
For the operating of the AI technology. So you're making money. You beat the lawsuit. What year was this? This was 2005.
This was 2004 at this point.
And so it starts growing. It starts doing better and better. How'd you guys fare during the global financial crisis?
So I didn't pay myself during that period. Stuart also didn't get paid during that period, but it was a great time for us to grow, because like all of a sudden the New York Sun, they had amazing reporters. We were like, let's go hire this person. Let's go hire that person. And they were looking for work, and everybody was cutting back. And I was like, if we don't pay ourselves, like some of the key people, I was like, I'll pay you in a year if we're still around. Yeah. And but we could get like a real great talent. And all of a sudden, we were able to hire people that we were never able to hire before. So I was able to get like real A reporters to come to The Real Deal, who taught us a lot, because they had good experience. They were coming from good organizations, and they came into The Real Deal. And when I couldn't afford these guys in the past, and they wouldn't want to come here, but now they were looking for work.
So it's kind of like in today's world, not so much in the publishing world, but in the real estate world, I talk about, it's like that line, be greedy when others are fearful. And right now, at least in my business, so many competitors are cutting, pulling back. And I was asked the question I don't know I don't think it was by one of your guys, like, why New York, why now? I was like, because these are the times. If you have the capital to do it, it's there are windows to take market share when your competition is pulling back or cutting or having to let go of talent. Same law applies to
Yeah, but
journalism.
you're also a founder principal, right? So you're not going to open up an office because New York is the hot place to be or there's good talent here. If you open up an office, you're going to make sure that that office earns.
I'm here. Aren't I?
You're here now
Yeah.
because you're not going to, like, this is the same with us. Like when we opened up in Texas, I went and moved to Texas for the summer, but I realized that summer is a
I was
horrible
gonna
time
say,
to be in
you're
Dallas.
the only person. Did someone pay you to take their
No,
apartment?
I went there and I stayed in a great place, and I was like, I love Texas. It was a beautiful place, but it was like a crazy thing to do. But I really wanted to understand the lay of the land because I was not going to hire all these reporters.
You spend your summer out in your LA office. You spend your fall in New York. You spend your winter in your South Florida office.
Right.
So you could spend spring in Texas. That's fine. So.
No, it was great, and as a principal founder, you don't take bets that you're not somehow going to work. I remember my friend who works for this other company, and he was like, "Oh, we're going to add this product by buying this company." I was like, "Well, you guys already have a product that's similar to that. How is this going to be different?" They were like, "Well, they have some talent that we don't have, and all of this stuff." I was like, "You guys are going to spend $130 million because they have some talent and somewhat of a similar product." He was like, "Yeah, we're going to make it work this way and that way." Within 2 years, they threw away $130 million, and they had to shut down that entire product, and it didn't work out. And you see that happening with tech a lot. But people are very generous with other people's money.
It's what is it? OPM, like the drug. It's OPM's other people's money.
Yeah, other people's money.
It's
yeah.
like opium, the drug makes you do crazy shit.
Yeah, yeah.
You know? That's no truer than in real estate, and a lot of your write-ups will sometimes be about spectacular deals in a good way, but also spectacular failures.
But look at the prop tech industry.
Yeah.
Like, it was the highest amount of money went into prop tech sector, more than healthcare or anything else. And show me one of those companies that everybody was so gung ho about. $800 million, $1 billion in investments, all these crazy valuations.
Real estate is where good VC money goes to die, right?
Wow.
So how big what is the real deal today? Walk the audience through number of locations, number of teammates. I have statistics in front of me, but the readership.
So we are in our headquarters are in New York. We also cover South Florida, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, Dallas, Houston, Austin, and I think that's it. Yeah, those 8 markets. And then we also have a national component to it too, and we're looking to go into other markets as well. And we're the largest real estate news outlet right now. We get over 250,000 readers a day that come to the website.
Do you still do print?
Yeah, we do.
Because I'll
print.
see your magazines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's, it's only about 10% of our business now, which is
soft
funny.
spot in your heart, though.
But I have a soft spot about it, because that's how it started. But I also find it as a great marketing vehicle for us.
You know how many meetings as a broker I would go into the lobby, whether it's a big office or a little family office, they all have like a little couch and a little coffee table, and there would be real estate publications.
That's marketing for us.
that's
like
marketing.
so for me, I spend that money, we produce it because I can't force you to go to my website, but you can't force your eyes away by being in that lobby and seeing that magazine there.
I'm old school like that. I'm a big believer in hard marketing for agents. It's different. It's postcards, but I said nobody unsubscribes from postcard campaigns, and nobody throws them out without looking at them.
Yeah, you're right.
Emails,
That's
you
true.
could unsubscribe, you could spam trap, you could effectively from your phone delete it. But hard marketing, it's expensive, right? But so what I would do is I do the first month of every quarter, I do first class, so I'd get the return addresses. And then my next 2 months, I do standard because it was cheaper, and I knew I had already scrubbed the mailing addresses, but. Similar in terms of hard marketing for you, actual publications, print. So you still do that. Monthly online audience. How many visitors a month do you get?
And monthly, it's
like a
daily. It's
couple
about 200. It's over. I think 6 million or something like that of unique visitors. But then,
how does it break up between? How does it break down? I'm sure you track between commercial and residential.
It's mostly commercial.
Really?
Yeah. So most of the
I would think that's a big growth opportunity because I feel like there's got to be probably 20 times the amount of resi agents in the U.S.
Yeah,
than
but
there-
only 12% of them make any money or
yeah,
actually.
I was going to say, I don't know what percentage actually is like what I say is a full-time job, and it's not like they sell their
Yeah.
sister's home once
So
a
if
year.
we do a tally of all the brokers in our markets, and it's amazing. You'll have a firm with like 1,000 brokers in it, and out of those 1,000 brokers, 90 of them are bringing in money for the firm. You know,
In the residential side.
in residential.
Yeah. Not commercial. Commercial, you know the desk costs, you know, like if they're not covering it, it better be because they're young and they're growing and you're investing and
Yeah.
you're investing in their skills and you're investing in their growth. Because if it's an established agent, you see it in today's market. You've seen a lot of agents.
Well,
get
now it's so much cheaper to have an agent, right? Because the training has got cut down, right? And you don't need as much office space. You don't have to pay for their computer. Everybody has their own
definitely
laptop.
in the residential, yeah.
Yeah, and they're so before it used to be like, hey, you're here, you better make money because I got to pay for your space, I got to pay for your computer. Now people don't even come into the office. So,
What's the vision? What's the plan for the Real Deal?
well, we really like to be able to cover all the markets in the U.S. And now with our national website, we like to think that if there's something important that happened in real estate, because before that it didn't exist. Like if something major happened in the world of real estate, where would you go to find that news, right? Like, so we feel that we have that for the real estate industry now, like with being able to cover all these multiple markets. If something major happened, we know that you can come to the Real Deal and know what that story is. And being able to cover all the, sort of nooks and crannies of the market is something that we like to do. But we also feel that, like we mentioned earlier, there's all of this information out there. But who can shape it and give it context, right? So that's what, I tell my reporters and editors this, that we're not just reporting news anymore. We almost have to tell people why this is important for them to understand, right? So I really do believe that if you're in a certain market and you understand what's happening in the retail sector, it gives you, ammo to understand what's happening in the commercial and the residential and the rental and so on and so forth. It all connects each other. And real estate is such an important industry, and it's such a it's the largest asset class in the world, and it's the biggest contributor to the taxes of every municipality in the U.S., and it's also the biggest contributor to political campaigns. So there's an endless supply of stories for us to be able to tell with real estate as a lens, right? So we always say every story has a real estate angle. Like every story, there's not a story.
It's in there somewhere.
There's something that's real estate related. Oh, there's nothing real estate related. Okay, well, find me all the homes that he owned. There's your real estate angle. Here, do a list of all of Jeffrey Epstein. There's no real estate story in Jeffrey Epstein. Oh yeah, there is. Look at all this amazing real estate he owned. Do a tally of all of those stories.
Yeah, who's it tied
and
to?
lo and behold, it's
sold
the
it
top
to him?
story of
Yeah.
the month. So there's
Yeah.
always a real estate angle to everything, to every major story that happens.
So you turned 50. How long do you see yourself doing this before either a liquidity event or even, going to a chairman role where you're not active day to day as a very active founder driven CEO? Like what does the future look like for you?
Well, I think the ultimate luxury is to be able to keep things growing, but also removing all the tasks I don't like about operating a business. And I feel like I'm working more and more towards that. I had a major goal for myself before I hit 50 is that, I wanted to cut down the number of meetings that I'm on. I just wanted to get overview, sort of understanding, because I do believe there are better operators than me out there too. Like people who can just do this 40, 50 hours a week. I can't do it that way. Like I have so many other things that I'm doing and working on that, having the people that can do the job better than me come into place. And that means having to pay people more or having to hire people that are more expensive than normal. But, when
you're paying for your time.
But that's 100%. And what I found is that some of these guys that you come in and you pay top dollar for, not always, but sometimes they come in and they teach you so much more, and they can streamline things so much more. They can make your business so much better. And, we started building a team that could do all these jobs that, Sturt and I do. And these guys came in and they changed our business. In the last 5 years, we've seen 30% growth year over year. And it's incredible. And I always tell Sturt, like, we know what the product is, but these guys do a better job of it than we do.
And what are some of you mentioned you have so many other things. What are some of the other things that you're spending your time on that are outside of the traditional real estate publishing business?
So, like, I really love the books that we recently put out a book called The New Kings of New York. It's about the 20 years of boom in New York City real estate and all the new sort of players that came into play.
What do they call it when you update a book after a period of time?
What do you mean?
Like the edition?
Oh, yes.
Well, one day when you make a new edition, I want to be in the new.
We'll do a new book.
There we go.
We'll do a whole new.
I was like, that's a goal for me. I got to be in Amir's new updated Kings of New York book.
And we thought about doing shows, and these producers would come to us to do these shows. But I was talking to somebody who does a lot of TV shows, and he was like, "You really don't need these people. You don't need the platforms anymore, because with Twitter, for example, or X, if you have a good show and you hire producers that have experience putting shows together, you could have that platform and that broadcast without getting an executive at ABC to approve you.
Sure.
And what the people at ABC bring for you is the experience in being able to tell a good story. But if you're able to hire those producers on your own and be able to put a show together that's focused on Matthews, that's interesting, that's engaging, that's showing Bob Knuckle cry, like those stories would be amazing, and those stories would be viewed. And you don't need ABC to approve you for it.
I got a great TV idea for a TV show or a show, a Netflix show. I'll tell you offline because I don't want to. I got such a good idea. I've been thinking about this for years. But you guys put on pretty big events too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
we just did one in Miami for about 6,000 people.
Yeah, I was there. That was a big one.
And we're doing one. We do the executive one in the Bahamas, which I hope you could come to. Future City.
This is crazy. I think I can go, and I'll tell you why. Because it's like, I don't quote me on this. It's like February 25th to 27th. Well, Matthews has their annual leadership and sales trip the 27th of February
in the Bahamas.
Rosewood, Bahamas.
No way.
Yeah.
So all of your team is going to be there?
The day it yours ends. So
that's amazing.
So anyway, we'll connect on that. I don't want to take up too much time on this, but you guys do was it their annual forum, which is a really big event at the Lincoln Center, right?
And we used to do it at the Lincoln Center, but it's a Union Hall. It adds a lot to our costs. Now we do it at the Met Pavilion, and that's the New York one that we do. And that's in May. And then the one that we do in Miami is the Miami Forum. And we're starting to do the LA Forum. We did the first one this year, which was great, but it's a much small. It's like 800 people.
LA's it's just spread out, and it doesn't have the tight community New York does.
It's more different. Residential. And it's funny, like, in New York, you go to a commercial office, and their offices are like on Park Avenue or like somewhere very desirable. Mm-hmm. There's like, they peacock, as they say. In LA, I would go to the CBRE office, and it would be like in El Segundo, outside of like some pond.
I founded Matthews in El Segundo because I couldn't afford the peacocking. El Segundo is a wonderful city next to the South Bay, Manhattan Beach. But CB, their office is okay. We just upgraded in El Segundo, so you have to check it out.
The only thing I know about El Segundo is from, what was it, Tribe Called Quest?
Yeah.
Remember that line? That I forget how the line goes, but I was like, I love that name, El Segundo.
It's cool. It's a good spot. It's like one of the rare middle class kind of blue collar parts of a beach community in LA. There's not a lot of them, so
it's connected to Orange County.
No. El Segundo is right in between the airport and the South Bay, and so there's an airport. Then there's El Segundo. Then there's a refinery.
Oh, no, I didn't know.
Then there's Manhattan Beach, Hermosa, Redondo. So it's like, it's industrial. It's an industrial town for a beach community. It hasn't totally.
That's interesting. And it's an industrial town on the beach?
Yeah. It's a kind way to put it. It's got a cool little downtown, but it's just in between, the airport and a huge refinery. So
I have to explor it more.
You will. All right. What else are you working on? You're authoring books. You're hosting events. You're a professor. You're a CEO. Anything else that keeps you? I mean, you're busy. You're very busy.
Yeah, I think I'm doing the things I enjoy doing, which is very important for me. I didn't want to have to be in this place where I had to wake up at 9 a.m. But now I wake up much earlier. I thought
it's called age.
Yeah, so I just wake up earlier.
Hopefully, you're going to bed earlier, though.
Yeah, definitely. It's but it's I really enjoy the projects that I do. I feel fortunate that I don't have to do things that I don't want to do, and that I feel like I'm very lucky about that.
What is your driver now?
Growth for the business is important for me. Maintaining the integrity of the business is important. And because we only have to answer to the readers, they keep you honest. The readers keep you very honest.
They never lie.
They
Based on what they click on, right?
every other Friday I call people who cancel their subscription. So I personally called them. I'm like, hey, I'm the founder of The Real Deal, and I noticed you canceled your subscription. I have a good turn rate on that because they're like, wow, you called me. Thanks so much. I love The Real Deal, but I'm not in the business anymore. $250 is too much of a subscription. But I get great feedback from them because some people just don't care. They're like, oh, I noticed you guys are doing too much. You did a bad article on Donald Trump or something like that. And for whatever the reasons are, some of this stuff we can't do anything about. But then sometimes they give you really good feedback. Sometimes they're like, look, I'm not getting value because of this and this. And I take that back to the team, and it's helpful to get that sort of read.
In terms of your driver for why you're still working very hard, you're very driven, let me ask a very simple question. It's a lot of people might say, hey, you built this big company. So many people found companies. I'm not saying this was your motivation. Hey, I want to build a big company so I could sell it and make a bunch of money. Why don't you just do that and go, go live on a boat somewhere?
I know a lot of wealthy people and really wealthy people.
New York will do that.
Yeah, New York you run into a lot of those guys. Yeah. And especially being in this industry. And I find so many of them, once you get to a certain place, and you know this already, but you get to a certain place that, adding more money into your bank account is just not going to change your lifestyle. No. There's the way you eat, the way you travel, the clothes you wear. I can't think of any other material things, but the houses you live in, they're just not going to change that much more, right?
No, you're really just talking. It's just you're talking about the length of the boat. You see these mega billionaires and Paul Allen had a 400-foot yacht, so Jeff Bezos built a 500.
Right.
But again, to your point, it's not going
to
make
change your life that dramatically for me to be like, I got to work harder. I got to do more. I got to make more money. And I meet a lot of wealthy people, and they're in their 60s and they're in their 70s or maybe younger. And nobody cares about them. And nobody calls them to invite them to the parties. Nobody calls to get their opinion. They don't matter, right? Even though they have a lot of money. And so I saw that early on, and I was like, when I'm in my 60s and 70s, I want to be relevant. And, of course, you're always relevant to your family and to your friends and things like that. But being relevant to the community and, beyond that, I always thought that, being in the media and, having The Real Deal, it gives you this relevancy. And, you look at even major corporations, as soon as Jamie Dimon retires from being the chairman of or CEO of Chase after 2-3 years. We talked about this with athletes, right? Yeah. People don't give a shit. They're like, care. You can't open doors for me at Chase anymore. I don't need to know you. So, but then you look at Rupert Murdoch, he's like in his 90s, and every president and king in the world is trying to get in this guy's office. And I saw a lot of value. I love that, the fact that even his kids are trying to get his attention, and he's still important to them. He's not just like some rich dad who's like, okay, you could have a little bit more money or whatever. They're all trying to vie for his attention. And I feel like I like that.
So it makes sense. You want to be in the mix. You want to feel like you matter.
You want to be relevant, right?
Yeah, relevant is a great word. Now journalism is a slightly different industry than I feel like a lot of the ones I've interviewed. A lot of the interviews more either financial based or athletes or something, but journalism. So their motivations might be a little more esoteric, truly. But in your opinion, having hired, managed, led so many people, third company now, and the first two were a little quicker, you know, but also being around very high achieving professionals. What have you found to be the common thread about those outlier individuals who go on to achieve great things in whatever their industry is, whether it's the very successful real estate people you've met, regardless of how lonely they are or not, or people within your organization who've really gone on, whether within The Real Deal or we're at The Real Deal for a while and then use that opportunity to grow somewhere else? Like, what has been the common thread that you've seen, a common driver that really allowed someone to be great in what they chose to do for a living?
Yeah, I think it comes down to one thing, and I know people hate to hear this, but it's they get a high out of the work. Like they get a high out of putting the deal together, and the deal could not go together. Of course, if it goes through, it's great. But whatever it is, that the work that they put into it, that gives them
People
a high.
use passion. I always say, well, let's use a different word, enthusiasm for what they do.
Or a high.
Yeah, or
like
high.
they get a high from it. And they just,
better.
and that high is, keeps them not thinking, oh, I'm making a check or I'm going to make a little bit more money or make less money. They don't care about any of that. They're just like,
it
I
also
like the
keeps
process.
them from thinking about hours work. Like, man, I've already worked 10 hours. It's like they have energy for what they're doing. It's almost, it sounds like kind of earlier in your career where you was like 24/7. You probably didn't, as much as people may think like, oh, man, I'm working so hard, because you never thought about what you were doing.
You never think about that. You're just doing the work, because that's, if you don't do the work, nobody else is going to do it.
Your advice would be, based on what you've seen for people who have done very well at what they choose to do, is work your hardest to find something that you have tremendous enthusiasm, that makes you feel high, that gives you that satisfaction, fulfillment, to where you don't feel like, man, like this is work.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that, like we talked about, it's, having that thought that you're building something and you're facilitating something that's important to you, that's important to the people that you interact with and touch. I think that part is really key in the folks who love doing what they do. I mean, you look at Bob Knackle, right? He's part of the retweet community.
My guy. I'm gonna get him to Matthews one of these days.
So he's let's talk about him. I remember seeing Bob after he sold his company, and somebody wrote him a check for $100 million, and I don't think that changed Bob's life too much, because he was already making a lot of money at his company.
Done very well.
But you see Bob today, nothing's changed for him. He's still doing what he did. He's still reaching out to his buyers and sellers.
He's got the map room.
He's got the map room that keeps growing. You're not going to tell me that Bob's doing all this stuff because he's trying to make an extra $1 million next week.
So Amir, I had him on and I asked him this question. I said, look, I'm not trying to put your business out on the streets, but let's just say professionally, financially, you've done very well. You don't have to work. Like, why do you do this?
Yeah.
And he goes, when I sold the company, my wife said, what do you want to do now? He's like, I want to talk to owners. I want to call owners and talk to them about their real estate.
Yeah.
He's like, that's what I like to do.
Yeah.
That's what I love to do. So he just kept doing it.
Yeah. And he's good at it.
Yeah. He's
and the
very
fact that he feels like and he's also facilitating for them too. He brings tremendous value to those guys. And there's a reason why people are like, go to Bob Knackle. Yes, you'll pay slightly more, but you know exactly what you're getting. There's every developer. I was talking to Harry Macklow, who's a major developer here in New York, and he loves Bob Knackle. He was like, even if somebody else brings me a deal, I try to get Bob's opinion on it. And that says a lot about Bob. I think.
No, he's the best. He gets tremendous satisfaction from giving back within our profession, of giving back to young professionals, young men and women who want to be great. He loves coaching. He loves, mentoring. Do you, as you've reached some heights in your profession, is that part of your sasatisfaction? Is kind of acting as a
I don't
mentor?
feel like I'm a great mentor. Like I said, I was not a great student, but I'm always an open book to anybody. When younger people reach out to me, I always try to, especially with my students, I always try to help them with jobs and stuff like that. But I don't know if my way of how I did things there's a systematic way of doing it. If I had to redo it all over again, I certainly couldn't do it at this age.
Because you're saying, hey, I don't know if I'm the best mentor. Is that because you're like, hey, you just need to figure it out.
Just do it.
Yeah. It's kind of like why MJ or Kobe probably weren't going to be great coaches, because they don't understand. Like, how do you not know? You just have to just go do it.
Right.
It's like, well,
I used to, I taught myself how to play the piano during COVID, and I was like, if there's nothing that you want to do right now that's not, you can't learn within a week. There's nothing. You can't tell me, Amir, go become a coder. give me 2 weeks in a cabin,
You could
and
do
I'll
some
come
damage.
back, and I'll come back understanding maybe I won't be the greatest.
Yeah.
I won't be Raj Patel, like putting out great code, but I'll figure it out. Like I'll be able to code something. So I don't think there's anything, if you really wanted to do something, you just go out there and learn it. Everything on the internet is free. You can learn anything from, all of these podcasts. I listen to some of the stuff that you do. There's so much great stuff about the business that you talk about. You tell me that if I want to be a commercial real estate broker, I can't go and just listen to all the podcasts that
Even
you've done.
better, you can go to Matthews.
You can go to Matthews and straight from the horse's mouth.
Let me ask you that question in reverse though. What has been your experience as a leader within your profession as to why so many won't get where they want to be in their life, professionally, financially, from a success? Like what is the biggest shortcoming, or what is the biggest issue people run into where you're like, man, if they could only have just figured that out, they could have been great, but they didn't, and so they won't?
Right. So, we always say what we do is not rocket science, right? Like it's legitimately not rocket science. And here we're in point A and you got to get to point C. So how are you going to get through that? Here's a phone, here's a computer. And if I had to leave you in a room and I said, if you didn't get to point C, that you're going to die or you're going to get fired or whatever, like you're going to fail at this task. Like, what would you do? Like, what are the things? Go and tell me what you're going to do, and I'll guide you. I've gotten to point C, I've gotten to point D, and I could guide you through the rest of the phase. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you, like, okay, you got to pick up the phone, then you got to dial it, then come up with the list of the 30 people who could help you get to point B, and then come up with the next 30 people who help you get to point C. So these are very basic stuff that, once you go out there and you put some effort to it, it becomes very clear. But what I found is that most people have to, I don't know if it's with self-esteem or what it is, but most people have to be like told exactly what to do. And, this is one of the big problems also with my company, but with a lot of other companies, is that things have been done a certain way for so long, and people who are doing the job, they're like, what would be easier if I moved this here instead of there? It could save me 10 minutes, and it could save the company $100 or whatever. But they don't do that. They're like, well, if this is what they want me to do, this is what I'll do. And that part breaks my heart, because sometimes we look at methods and processes we have in place for like 7-10 years, and it's always worked, and we don't complain about it because it works. But then you go and look at it, you're like, oh my God, if we just put an Excel sheet here, it would have solved the world's problems.
A lot of times, I think we have that in brokerage, especially as technology is making its way, where I just say, look, the reason it was done this way historically is because the technology at the time could only serve this process.
Or I didn't know it.
Yeah.
I didn't know this.
Nowadays, there is better efficiency, especially by way of technology. Some of it's coaching, some of it's strategy, sure. This is why we need to do things differently. It's not just for the sake of doing it differently. It's because now the window has opened where different works, as opposed to different 10 years ago might not have worked. I'm going to tie this up here. What advice, kind of high level, would you have for listeners personally or professionally to achieve what they want to achieve in life?
Well, right now, I feel like the world is going through this incredible transition, like with the technology that's coming out there. And no matter how you look at it, the world is going through a transition. That means there's going to be a lot of changes. And I feel like that opens up a lot of windows for opportunity. And, the same thing with the internet. We were talking about it earlier. There was a lot of market share that got eaten up because the people who knew how to type into a browser were able to eat the lunch of the people who didn't type into a browser. Now the same thing is happening with AI. And AI it's not crypto, right? This is not blockchain. This is real technology that, if you listen to the people in power, you realize that these are the conversations they're having. The fact that the U.S. Congress and the Senate has to take classes on AI and understand how it's shifting.
They're nervous,
and that's going to change things. But it's also going to create tremendous opportunity. So if you're, there's a ton of commercial brokers out there, and there are bigger companies than yours out there. And if you're able to make a part of your business more seamless and more efficient by using AI and taking that first step forward, and then the next step is going to come easier because you're like, well, I used it there, I can also use it here, and I could combine the two and use it here. You're going to be able to eat other people's.
We're already leveraging it. We are in the process, about 15 months in, developing our new CRM and entire ecosystem that is interlaced with all AI. And that's why I go to your conference in South Florida. Is that I was there with our CFO, our COO, our CTO, where we were there to learn and take notes, and we definitely came away with a couple of things there. Really, not just from a technical advice standpoint, but really putting it into practice. Where it's like, oh, we hadn't really thought of that. There was a residential agent who mentioned something they were using. I was like, gosh, like I wonder if that will work for commercial. And the more we thought about it, the more we're like, you know what, there's some serious opportunity here. So I think everybody, whether you're in the publishing world, in the real estate world, everything in between, needs to be thinking that way. So, you know, if I heard you correctly, it's like, hey, be aware of technology and learn to leverage it.
100%. I mean, especially with this stuff, it's and you know, it's going to get a lot easier. It's going to be far more web-based, and you don't have to start everything from scratch.
If you could go back and talk to your 22-year-old younger self, what would one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
That things are going to be okay. You know, I always had this refugee mentality that like always had to make sure there was shelter and food, you know.
Do you think you suffered from a lot of anxiety that, looking back, hindsight's 2020, but do you think you had a lot of just anxiety because of what you went through as a actual refugee?
You have this mentality that things are going to be taken away from you.
Because they were.
Yeah. So you think that's possible. And then I think about my parents, and, you know, they had like their life set, everything was okay, and everything was taken away overnight.
So
and it happens to people all the time.
I'm not saying you weren't going to be like who you are, even if everything stayed normal in Iran and nothing ever changed. But I'm going to take a leap and say some of your motivation, your drive, your manic pursuit of success and work may have come from that refugee mentality. How do you get someone who grew up in America in a middle class, 2 parents, 2.4 brothers and sisters, and just in their mind may have faced adversity, but respectfully relative to what you went through, just doesn't have that to draw from?
You know, I mean, you have kids, and you want life for your kids to be as easy as possible, and that's just the way of nature, right? Mm-hmm. And until they're in a place where they're really challenged, that they're like, I know that I have the support and love of my parents, but if I want to get from point A to point B, I have to make it happen.
It's tough, yeah. I mean, you know, it's
and you don't want your kid to be in that position.
Well, your nature is you see pain, and certainly physical pain. It's understood. If you see your kid physically being hurt, you stop it, and everybody says it's great. But so much of their development emotionally and mentally really comes from, I hate to use the word suffering, but like failure, right?
Yeah. And struggle.
And struggle. And so our natural biological instinct is to stop them from suffering and from struggling and from pain, mental and emotional. But that's ultimately what is the greatest driver of development.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge. And
it's hard for parents to step in and
trust
say,
me, man,
like,
I got 4. I'm working through it every day. You know, it's that's a longer conversation. But well, I can't thank you enough. I'm going to ask. I like to ask: Are there any resources that you recommend to our audience? Whether it's classes, books, programs, anything that you think would help?
Like we talked about, you know,
subscribe to The Real Deal.
Subscribe to The Real Deal. If you're in the real estate business, I can't imagine not being subscribed to The Real Deal. But I can't, you know, there's so much information out there, and if you find a good curator of information, it's so easy to have an advantage over the rest of the market, because a lot of people don't put in the time to just read, you know, and if they really care about their business, if they really care about their trade, to just read about what successful people in their trade are doing or what they did to get to where they are. And just learning about that stuff, it's such an easy way not to make the same mistakes or to be able to take advantage of the, you know, the positives that are out there.
I really appreciate that. I know the audience will do that. Real Deal is fantastic. Subscribe. In addition to their website, you guys have all the social accounts. You guys do a good job with the graphics on Instagram and the stories on Twitter. So it's a very efficient aggregator of real estate information. But regardless of what profession or what industry is, to Amir's point, identify the great curators of information that's valuable to what you've chosen to do for your life professionally and personally, you know, and there's topics there, and follow those and read and devour that information. Can't thank you enough for hosting me in your wonderful city of New York.
Happy to have you here.
And in your place. I look forward to the next event. I'm going to see if I can meet up with you in the Bahamas.
I'm counting on it.
Yeah, that's going to be fun.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's good to see you.
Thanks, Kyle.